In this video, I'm going to be explaining the difference between shooting JPEG and RAW images with your digital camera. Hi, Paul here from PhotoGenius. Now, should I shoot JPEG or RAW images is a question I get asked a lot. In this video, I'm going to try and answer that question for you, explaining the advantages as well as maybe the disadvantages of each format. That way you can decide which best suits you and your type of photography. So when it comes to saving images, you have a choice between two formats, JPEG, which is the factory default, and RAW. And let's start by looking at JPEG. So when you take a picture, your camera is basically turning what it sees into numbers. The camera then processes the image in camera, so you don't have to, and this will include things like applying sharpening, white balance settings, etc. Now next, the camera needs to compress the data to make the image file smaller. This basically means that some of the numbers and the data that make up this image will have to go. And finally, the leftover data is then saved to the memory card as a JPEG image that you can view on the LCD screen or copy to a computer or mobile device for viewing or printing. And of course, you can share it via social media. Now, shooting RAW format is very different. Once again, we take a photo and the camera turns what it sees into numbers. But unlike with JPEG, the image will not be processed in the camera and there is no compression. So no numbers are lost or thrown away. All the data is saved to the card as a RAW file. A JPEG preview is also embedded into the RAW file so we can review the image on the back of the LCD screen. If you're shooting RAW, what you see when you take a picture on the back of the camera is a JPEG version of that RAW file. So now let's take a look at the pros and cons of shooting JPEG images versus RAW images, starting with JPEGs. JPEG is a recognized standard image format. So this means you can view the images straight out of the camera on your desktop, laptop or mobile device. No additional software is needed, and you can also print the images and share via social media. Now remember, the camera also processes the image for you, so things like sharpening, white balance, color saturation are already taken care of. So you don't need to edit the image unless of course you want to. Now also, the image has been compressed, and this means the file size is much smaller, so you can save more images on the memory card. I have a Nikon here, and this is set to JPEG at the moment, and this tells me that on the card I can record 865 images. Now because the image file is much smaller, this also means that when you take an image, the camera can save the image to the card quicker, and this can be a huge advantage when shooting sports, using the continuous shooting mode on your camera. Now the disadvantages of shooting JPEG are as follows. The in-camera processing means that if you want to do some editing afterwards, there are some things you cannot correct, like white balance and sharpening, because they have already been applied in camera. And whilst having a small file size may mean we get lots of images on the card, the in-camera compression also means that you lose a lot of data. Now this cannot be recovered sadly, so your image will have a lower dynamic range, and if you like landscapes, this could mean overexposed skies as well as underexposed areas in the darker shadow parts of your image. These cannot sadly be recovered. So now let's take a look at the advantages of shooting RAW images. Now remember, when you shoot RAW, the data has not been processed or compressed in the camera. This means that your image will have more colours and a wider dynamic range. This will allow you to recover more detail when editing your image, particularly in the lighter or darker areas of the image. Now we can also adjust and correct things if necessary, like white balance. The image is also not sharpened in camera. Instead, you do this yourself using software like Lightroom or Photoshop. This is a generally much better way and more powerful way to edit and sharpen your images, giving better results. Now after editing the RAW file, we save the image as a JPEG. This can then be printed or shared with friends via social media. But the original RAW data remains even after editing. So the great thing about RAW is you can go back, make even more changes, or completely undo any changes you may have made during the editing process. This is why RAW images are often referred to as the digital negative. So now let's take a look at the disadvantages of shooting RAW. Now, because as yet there is no standard RAW format, you may not be able to view your images on your computer or device without some software. RAW images cannot be directly printed or shared on social media because the format will be unrecognized. You will simply need to convert the image to a JPEG, and this is done after you've finished editing. Now, because the RAW image has not been processed by the camera, it may look a little bit dull and flat to begin with, but to get the best from it, you process your image using software like Adobe Lightroom or Photoshop. Now, the larger RAW file will also mean far less images can be saved to the memory card, and additional storage space may be required for saving and archiving your photos. Now, if you recall, a few moments ago we had this Nikon camera here set to JPEG, and the camera had indicated that it had enough space on the memory card for 865 images. I've simply changed the settings now to RAW, and that has dropped to 476. Now, this indicates how much larger the RAW files are, but also how much data is being lost if we shoot JPEG. So I'm now going to show you how easy it is to edit a RAW image in Lightroom. And of course, you can also put a JPEG image into Lightroom or Photoshop for that matter and edit it as you would a RAW image. But with less data available, you will find the picture may start to suffer from what is called digital noise, particularly in the dark or shady areas of the image. So having set the camera to record both JPEG and RAW images simultaneously, I've got a picture of a seagull here, and on the left hand side of the screen we have the JPEG, on the right we have the RAW image, and they both look fairly similar, but I do note that the JPEG image definitely looks nicer in terms of the colours. Now if we zoom in, to me the JPEG looks a little bit sharper as well, definitely better colours, but remember the JPEG image, which is the one on the left, has been processed already in the camera. The RAW image is unprocessed. So as we're in Lightroom, we're going to go to the Develop module, selecting just the RAW image, and we're going to do a very quick edit. Now the first thing I'm going to do is bring down the exposure, because there is quite a bit of overexposure on this area on the gull. So I'm going to bring the exposure slider down, then I'm going to go to the highlight slider and bring that down, and that's starting to now recover a lot of the detail on the white area just here. Now colours aren't too great at the moment, it looks a little bit warm, so I'm going to grab the white balance tool, click here, and look at the difference. The sky now is a beautiful blue colour, maybe a little bit too blue, so I'm just going to bring the white balance temperature down a shade, and that already looks pretty good to me. Now next I'm going to check the whites slider, bringing this down again to recover some more detail and raise the shadows just a tiny bit so we get a bit more detail under the wing of the bird here. Clarity slider will give us a little bit more sharpness, add a tiny bit more sharpening as well, being careful not to overdo this. And now I'm going to head over to lens correction, because I'm noting some purple, what is called purple fringing along the edge line here, where the white of the bird meets the blue of the sky. So I'm in the lens correction section. I'm going to go down to defringe and drop the purple. I'm also going to select the profile, and that looks a lot better. Now there is a little bit of digital noise in the sky and in the bird, so I'm going to head over to noise reduction and just bump that up a tiny bit. I think we're just about done. So this is the current edit, and if we look at the original, this is the original, this is the edit. Now what we'll do is we'll go back into the library module on Lightroom, and we will do a side-by-side comparison between this and the JPEG. So on the left hand side we see the edited RAW image, and on the right hand side is the JPEG. And remember, originally the JPEG looked better than the RAW image before it was processed, but now the RAW image has been processed, I'm sure you'll agree that the RAW image definitely looks better. So that was a quick edit in Lightroom. Now don't forget, once the edit is finished, I can export a JPEG version that I can then use on my website, email to friends, or put it up on social media, and the RAW image remains. Now I do want to add that this video is not sponsored, endorsed or paid for in any way by Adobe, but to be honest, if you're keen on getting into editing your images, then the software that I use and I want to recommend to you is Adobe Lightroom. A lot of people start with Photoshop, but I think Lightroom is the way to go. It's a great program and it allows you to both manage and catalogue your images as well as editing them. I recommend checking out what is called the Adobe Creative Cloud Photography Package. In this package, you get access to the full professional version of Lightroom, and as a bonus, you get the full professional version of Photoshop as well. Now, if you're in the US, this will cost you just $10 a month. That's around $15 here in Australia. And if you're in the UK, that works out at about £10. More details, check the links below the video. So to conclude, there are clear advantages and also disadvantages of both JPEG and RAW formats. But if you want to get more from your images, then the only way to go, in my view, is RAW. As a professional photographer, I need more control over my images. And also want to be able to deliver the very best results. The large files are not a problem because the cost of memory cards are much lower than they were a few years ago. Plus, you can pick up an external hard drive to store or back up your images very, very cheaply. But if you're just starting out, and especially if the thought of sitting in front of a computer and editing your images is just not for you, then JPEG is the way to go. Cameras have advanced so much in the last few years that JPEG images straight out of the camera look pretty good. And if being able to share your images instantly via the likes of Instagram or Facebook is important to you, then the JPEG format wins. And if you're still not sure which way to go, then remember you can also shoot JPEG and RAW images simultaneously in camera. That way you get the best of both worlds. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you did, please like us and give us a thumbs up and consider subscribing. You should see the link somewhere down here. I hope to see you again soon. See ya!